They didn't know the weak cowboy was a friend of 77 Apache warriors. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into our story. In the dusty heart of the American West, there was a cowboy who was unlike any other. To the people in the nearby town, he was a weak, fragile man. They saw his rough hands, his sun-worn face, and the way he stumbled around like he didn't belong in this unforgiving land. They whispered behind his back, calling him the weak cowboy, mocking his every move. He lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, far away from the hustle and bustle. Most people barely even noticed him, and those who did, didn't think much of him. They saw him as a failure, a man who couldn't even handle the simplest of ranching tasks. But there was something they didn't know. Something that made him more than just the weak, lonely cowboy they thought he was. For many years, he had kept his secret hidden. The town didn't know that, in the shadows of his quiet life, he was friends with 77 Apache warriors, a bond forged in a time long past. You see, this cowboy was no stranger to hardship. There was a time when he had been just like them, caught in a world where survival was everything. He had fought, bled, and lost more than most could imagine. And it was during one of his darkest moments that he had met them, Apache warriors who had saved his life. It was a bond that would last a lifetime, one that could never be broken, no matter how far apart they were. But why would anyone believe this about the weak cowboy? After all, he never spoke of it. He had no reason to. The warriors, though, knew him for who he truly was, and they were always there, watching from afar. No one could understand the connection between him and the Apache tribe. But as fate would have it, the day would come when that connection would be revealed in a way no one ever expected. On a hot summer afternoon, when the sun was hanging high in the sky, trouble began to brew in the town. A group of men, known for their cruelty and lawlessness, had taken to bullying the weak cowboy. They laughed at him, threw insults, and thought little of him. What they didn't know was that these men had made a dangerous mistake, one that would soon cost them dearly. As they taunted the cowboy one fateful afternoon, they had no idea that, just beyond the hills, 77 Apache warriors were silently watching. They were not there for the cowboy. They were there for the justice that had been long overdue. The cowboy, standing in the middle of the dusty street, had a decision to make. Should he fight back, showing the world the strength they all thought he lacked? Or should he wait, trusting that his friends, the Apache warriors, would arrive just in time to help? The town didn't know it, but their fate had already been sealed by their own arrogance. And soon, they would learn that even the weakest cowboy could have the strongest friends. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the small town, the tension in the air grew thick. The cowboy stood alone in the dusty street, his eyes locked onto the men who had been mocking him for days. He could feel the weight of their sneers and insults, the way they made him feel small, invisible. But he wasn't the same man they thought he was. He had lived through worse, fought through worse, and survived worse. He had learned to keep his head low, to avoid trouble. But today, something felt different. Today, the cowboy could feel the stirrings of something deeper inside him, something long buried beneath years of solitude and quiet suffering. He didn't know if it was the courage to stand up to these men or the desperate need to show them he was no weakling. Whatever it was, it gave him a strange sense of calm. The men had come to torment him again, but this time, they would find that he wasn't going to back down. They surrounded him, sneering, poking fun at his shabby clothes, and laughing as they pushed him around. They taunted him, expecting him to cower, to beg them to stop, but he didn't. He stood his ground, his fists clenched by his sides, waiting for the inevitable. That's when he heard it, the distant sound of hooves. At first, it was just a whisper, barely audible over the raucous laughter of the men. But then it grew louder, unmistakable, and the men fell silent, their attention shifting to the horizon. The cowboy didn't have to look. He knew what was coming. His friends, the Apache warriors, had arrived. 77 Apache warriors, led by the man who had once saved his life, appeared on the ridge. They were silent, moving with the grace and precision of a well-trained force, their eyes fixed on the men who had been tormenting their friend. The warriors did not speak. Their presence alone was enough to send a shiver down the spines of the men in the street. The cowboy stood still, his heart racing, as the warriors rode closer. The men, realizing what was happening, shifted uneasily, their bravado quickly melting away. They had no idea how to respond. The leader of the warriors, a tall man with weathered skin and a scar running down his cheek, dismounted first. His eyes scanned the men, assessing them with a calm authority that seemed to pierce through the air. The cowboy could see the leader's gaze flicker to him, and in that moment, he knew he wasn't alone. His friends had come to protect him, and they would not let the injustice stand. The men who had been laughing at him now looked terrified. They took a step back, unsure of what to do as the warriors slowly surrounded them. The cowboy's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the heat of the moment rising, but he didn't flinch. He knew what was coming. He didn't need to say a word. The warriors would take care of it. The leader of the Apache warriors stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of a man who had seen more than his fair share of battles. "These men have wronged our friend," he said, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "And for that, they will face justice." The cowboy's throat tightened, but he didn't speak. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or afraid. He had never wanted violence, but he understood. The code of the Apache. They would not let injustice go unpunished. The men who had tormented him for so long were now at the mercy of the Apache warriors. They could see the warriors' weapons glinting in the fading light, the war paint on their faces, and the fierce determination in their eyes. The cowardice of the men who had tormented the cowboy now showed in their trembling hands and their wide, fearful eyes. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated the strength of his bond with the Apache warriors. And now, they would pay the price for their ignorance. The cowboy stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each breath, feeling the presence of the Apache warriors around him. He didn't need to say anything. They knew what to do. The warriors advanced, their movements swift and coordinated, each one carrying the weight of justice on their shoulders. The cowboy watched as they surrounded the men, their eyes cold with determination. The time for mocking was over. The time for justice had come. The air was thick with tension as the Apache warriors closed in on the group of men who had tormented the cowboy for so long. The men, once so confident in their superiority, now stood frozen, trapped in the cold silence of their impending fate. The warrior leader, his eyes fierce and unwavering, turned his attention back to the cowboy, offering him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. The cowboy felt his heart race, but there was no turning back now. He had spent years hiding in the shadows, letting others see him as weak, insignificant. But now, in this moment, he realized how wrong they had all been. This was not weakness. This was strength born from survival, from the bond he shared with these warriors, a bond forged in the fire of shared battles and shared loss. The leader of the Apache stepped forward, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a sharp knife. "You have wronged him," he said, his tone calm but firm, "and for that, you will pay." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of justice. The men who had tormented the cowboy began to fidget nervously, glancing at each other with fear in their eyes. They had no idea what they had unleashed. Their arrogance, their cruelty, had led them to this point, and now they had nowhere to run. The warriors encircled them, their faces painted in the traditional markings of their tribe, their eyes dark with intent. The cowboy stood still, watching, as the warriors prepared to carry out the justice that had been long overdue. He could feel the tension building inside him, the weight of his past decisions, the fear of what might happen next. But he didn't flinch. He knew what needed to be done. This was not just about revenge, it was about righting a wrong. The warriors had never been merciless, but they would not let this act of cruelty go unpunished. The cowboy could feel the energy shift in the air, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. The leader of the Apache warriors took another step forward, his gaze now fixed on the men who had tormented the cowboy. "You have no place here," he said, his voice steady but full of authority. "You have taken from this land, from these people, and now you will answer for it." The men who had once felt invincible now seemed small and insignificant in the face of this powerful presence. They had underestimated the cowboy, and they had underestimated the Apache warriors. But there was no time for regret now. The justice they sought had arrived, and there would be no escaping it. As the warriors began to take action, the cowboy stood in the center of it all, watching, not with fear, but with a sense of calm determination. He had made peace with his past, and now it was time to face the future. The warriors moved with precision, their movements swift and coordinated, as they swiftly subdued the men who had wronged the cowboy. The sound of footsteps, of ropes being tied, filled the air. The men, once so full of arrogance, now found themselves at the mercy of those they had wronged. The cowboy watched as the Apache warriors carried out their justice, their actions swift and efficient. He felt a strange sense of relief, but also something else, something deeper, something more profound. This was not just about the men in the street. This was about something bigger, about justice, about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. As the last of the men was secured, the leader of the Apache turned to the cowboy once more. "You are not weak," he said quietly, his voice filled with respect. "You have the heart of a warrior. Never forget that." The cowboy nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen, truly understood. The warriors, his friends, had shown him that he was not alone. And as they prepared to leave, the cowboy stood tall, no longer the weak, lonely man he once was, but a man with a place, a purpose, and a bond that would never be broken. As the dust settled and the last of the men who had tormented the cowboy were led away, there was a strange sense of quiet that enveloped the small town. The once feared bullies, now subdued and bound by the Apache warriors, had nothing left but their shame. The cowboy stood in the center of it all, still surrounded by the warriors, the sounds of their horses' hooves, and the distant chatter of the wind the only thing that broke the silence. The townspeople, who had watched in disbelief, now began to stir. Whispers spread quickly, the realization dawning on them that the weak cowboy was not what they had assumed. He was not a helpless fool. He was something else, something far more dangerous, and the warriors who stood by his side were a testament to that. The leader of the Apache warriors, the man who had always stood tall beside the cowboy, turned to him and gave a slow nod of approval. "You have shown them," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You are no weak man." The cowboy felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of belonging, a sense of pride in the bond he shared with these warriors. He had never asked for their protection, never sought their help, but here they were, standing with him, not out of obligation but out of respect. It was a respect that went beyond words, beyond deeds. It was a bond forged in the fires of life and death, a bond that could not be broken. The cowboy turned his gaze back to the town, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the quiet life he had known would never be the same again. The people in the town had seen him differently now, but he knew that their judgment would never truly change. They would always see him as an outsider, a man who didn't fit their mold, no matter how much he proved himself. The warrior leader stepped forward again, his face unreadable, but his eyes filled with understanding. "You have lived among us," he said. "You are part of our people now." The cowboy nodded, his chest swelling with emotion. He had always felt like an outsider, always felt like he didn't belong. But now, with the Apache warriors by his side, he felt like he had finally found a place in this harsh world. "Thank you," the cowboy said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. "I didn't ask for this, but I'm grateful." The leader smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. "We all have our place in this world," he said. "Sometimes, it just takes a little while to find it." As the Apache warriors prepared to leave, the cowboy stood still, watching them ride off into the distance. He knew that his life would never be the same again. The bond between him and the Apache was unbreakable, and with that bond came a responsibility he hadn't expected. But for the first time in years, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The town would never fully accept him, but he no longer cared. He had found something far more important. He had found his true family. And as the last warrior disappeared over the ridge, the cowboy turned and walked back to his cabin, a sense of peace settling over him. He knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would never be alone again. As the days passed, the cowboy found himself settling into a new rhythm, a rhythm that had been long absent from his life. The dust of the town no longer felt like a weight pressing down on him. but rather, it felt like a part of his existence, a part of his new purpose. The Apache warriors had left, their mission fulfilled, but their presence lingered in the cowboy's heart, giving him a sense of pride and strength he had never known. He could still feel the weight of the leader's words, "You are part of our people now." Those words echoed in his mind every time he walked through the town or looked out at the endless stretch of land that surrounded him. But there was something else, something he had not anticipated. The townspeople, once so dismissive of him, were starting to change. Their eyes, once filled with mockery, now held a hint of respect. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the cowboy feel like he had earned something, something more than just survival. As the sun set on another quiet evening, the cowboy sat on the porch of his cabin, the weight of the day's work behind him. His hands, still rough and calloused from years of labor, rested on his knees as he stared out at the horizon. The land stretched out before him, vast and untamed, just like the life he had led. He had always thought of himself as an outsider, someone who didn't quite belong anywhere. But now, he was beginning to see that maybe he had been wrong all along. Maybe this land, this rugged place, was where he was meant to be. He had been tested, pushed to his limits, and now, he had found a purpose beyond just surviving. He had found something worth fighting for. The cowboy's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of hooves in the distance. He rose from his chair, his heart beating a little faster. It wasn't unusual for travelers to pass through, but there was something about the rhythm of those hooves that felt different. As the rider came into view, the cowboy recognized the silhouette immediately. It was the leader of the Apache warriors, riding alone. The cowboy felt a surge of relief wash over him. The Apache leader dismounted, his expression unreadable but respectful. "I have returned to check on you," the leader said, his voice steady, as always. "I see the town has begun to change its tune." The cowboy nodded, grateful for the leader's visit. "Things are different now," he said quietly. "I never expected any of this. I never expected to be seen." The Apache leader's gaze softened for a moment. "Sometimes, the world only sees us when we stand up for what is right. You have done that." The cowboy felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. It was true. He had stood up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. And now, he was no longer the weak cowboy the town had once seen. He was a man with strength, with purpose, and with the respect of those who mattered. As the leader mounted his horse to leave, he paused, turning to the cowboy one last time. "You are not alone," he said. "Your family is always with you, even when they are far away." The cowboy watched as the leader rode off into the distance, his figure disappearing into the fading light. A sense of peace settled over him, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly at home. The cowboy turned back to his cabin, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living, and that was enough. The days passed in a calm haze, with the cowboy settling into his new life, but the lingering shadows of the past always seemed to hang just at the edge of his mind. The town was quieter now, and the people had begun to acknowledge him in subtle ways. There were no longer the mocking whispers or the looks of disdain that had once followed him. They no longer saw the weak cowboy. Instead, they saw a man who had stood tall in the face of danger, a man who had earned his place in this unforgiving world. But the cowboy knew that peace was never permanent, not in this land, not for someone like him. Deep down, he felt the restlessness creeping in, the constant pull of something unknown, something that called to him from the distant horizon. One afternoon, as he worked in the fields, a familiar sound reached his ears, the soft clip-clop of hoofs. He paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, and turned toward the sound. The leader of the Apache warriors rode into view once again, this time with a few of his men accompanying him. The cowboy straightened, feeling a mix of curiosity and caution. It had been some time since the last visit, and he wasn't sure what had brought the leader back. The Apache leader dismounted, his expression unreadable, as usual. "I come with a request," the leader said, his voice steady but with a note of urgency. The cowboy nodded, waiting for him to continue. "There are troubles to the north. A group of settlers, they have encroached on our land. They have taken more than their share, and they refuse to leave. This is not a matter of trade. This is a matter of survival. I need your help." The cowboy's heart skipped a beat. The word help from the leader of the Apache warriors was not something he had expected to hear. He had been living a quiet life, far from the battles and struggles that had once defined his days. He had thought that he had earned his peace, but now, standing in front of the warrior, he realized that peace had never truly been his to keep. "What do you need me to do?" the cowboy asked, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. The leader looked at him with a knowing gaze. "Your strength, your experience. You know the land. You know the people. We are not asking for war, but for justice. We do not seek bloodshed, but we will not let them take what is ours." The cowboy nodded slowly. He knew the land well, perhaps better than anyone in this part of the country. He had spent years alone, learning the ways of survival, learning the ways of the land. But he had never thought of it as something worth defending, until now. He thought of the Apache warriors, the bond they had shared, and the respect they had shown him. He thought of his own life, how far he had come from the man they once mocked, and he realized that he could not turn away. He could not sit idly by while injustice was done. "I'll help," he said quietly, the words coming more easily than he expected. The leader nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We knew we could count on you." That night, the cowboy sat alone in his cabin, his thoughts racing. The decision he had made felt both right and wrong at the same time. He had been living in peace, away from the violence and struggles of the world, but now he was being drawn back in. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he knew that he had to do something. He couldn't ignore the call of justice, not when it was so clear. The next morning, the cowboy saddled his horse and set out with the Apache warriors. They rode north, their journey filled with a sense of purpose and determination. As they approached the settlers' land, the cowboy could feel the tension in the air. He had spent enough time in these parts to know when something was wrong, when a storm was about to break. He looked around at the warriors, their faces stern, but with an unspoken understanding between them. This was not about bloodshed. This was about ensuring that the land, the people, and the values they had fought for would be respected. The cowboy rode at the front, his eyes scanning the horizon, ready for whatever came next. He had come a long way from the weak, lonely man the town had once seen. And now, standing side by side with the Apache warriors, he felt stronger than ever. He had a purpose again. He was no longer just surviving. He was living for something greater. As the cowboy and the Apache warriors rode deeper into the northern lands, the tension was palpable. The ground beneath their horses' hooves grew harder, the air colder, and the sense of unease thickened. The land had been untouched by settlers for a long time, and its rugged beauty held a quiet, untamed power. But now, it was under threat. The cowboy had seen the signs of destruction in the distance, fires that scarred the earth, fences marking the land where it didn't belong, and the telltale signs of settlers who believed they could take what wasn't theirs. He had never seen a group of people so intent on carving out a place for themselves, no matter who or what they had to push out of the way. The Apache leader's words echoed in the cowboy's mind. "We do not seek bloodshed, but we will not let them take what is ours." The cowboy knew that standing idle was no longer an option. They were about to face a new kind of enemy, one that didn't know the land, didn't respect it, and didn't care for the people who lived in harmony with it. As they neared the settlers' camp, the cowboy could hear the sounds of axes chopping, saws buzzing, and the distant chatter of voices. The once silent wilderness was now filled with the noise of intrusion. The cowboy felt a stirring in his chest, a sense of duty that went beyond his bond with the Apache. This wasn't just about defending a people or a tribe. It was about protecting something sacred, something that couldn't be taken without consequences. The Apache warriors dismounted silently, their eyes scanning the camp from a distance. The cowboy remained on his horse, watching the scene unfold before him. The settlers had set up a series of crude buildings and tents, their wagons lined up in rows, and the land around them was scarred from the constant digging, clearing, and building. There was a man standing at the center of it all, barking orders, clearly in charge. The cowboy recognized him instantly. He had seen men like him before, strong-willed, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. But the cowboy also knew that this man's strength was based on ignorance. Ignorance of the land, of the people, and of the forces they were about to unleash. The Apache leader looked at the cowboy and nodded. Without a word, the warriors began to move into position, their movements swift and deliberate. The cowboy remained where he was, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. He knew what had to be done. The settlers had taken enough. Now, it was time for them to understand the consequences of their actions. As the Apache warriors approached the edge of the camp, the settlers began to notice the movement. The air grew tense as they saw the group of warriors on horseback, their faces painted and their eyes fierce with determination. The man in charge of the camp stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "What is this?" he called out, his voice strong but laced with uncertainty. "We have no quarrel with you." The Apache leader's voice was steady as he spoke. "You have taken what does not belong to you. The land you stand on is sacred to my people. And now, you will leave." The settler leader scoffed, taking a step forward. "This land belongs to the government. We have a right to be here." The cowboy could feel the anger rising within him, but he kept his emotions in check. He had learned long ago that acting in anger only made things worse. This wasn't about fighting, it was about justice. The Apache leader's eyes narrowed. The government does not own this land. It was never theirs to give. The cowboy watched as the settler leader faltered for a moment. The truth was, he didn't have an argument for that. His people had come to take, not to ask. "We don't want trouble," the settler leader said, trying to backtrack, but his voice lacked conviction. "We'll leave, but we need time to pack up." The Apache leader's gaze hardened. "You have no time. Leave now, or face the consequences." The settler leader hesitated, but then nodded reluctantly, signaling for his men to begin packing up. The Apache warriors watched, unmoving, as the settlers began to dismantle their camp, their faces dark with the realization that they had been outmatched. The cowboy felt a sense of relief wash over him. This battle had been won without a single drop of bloodshed. The land had been protected, and the settlers had been forced to leave. As the last of the settlers packed up and rode away, the cowboy felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had done what he had come to do, and he knew that, for now, the land was safe. But there was something more in the air, something that felt like the calm before another storm. The cowboy looked to the Apache leader, who met his gaze with a solemn nod. "You have earned your place among us," the leader said quietly. "But this is only the beginning. There is more to be done." The cowboy nodded, his resolve hardening. He wasn't just a man alone anymore. He was part of something much bigger, something that had the power to change the course of history. As the cowboy and the Apache warriors watched the last of the settlers ride away, there was a strange sense of peace in the air. The land, once again, belonged to those who understood it, who respected it, and who had fought for it. The cowboy felt a quiet pride in what had been achieved, but beneath that pride, there was something else, something that tugged at his chest. He had stood up for what was right, and for that, he had earned the respect of the Apache warriors. But this was only one battle, and he knew that there were more to come. The world was changing, and the Apache were not the only ones vying for control of the land. There would always be others, men like the settlers, who believed they could take whatever they wanted without consequence. The cowboy knew this would not be the last time he had to make a stand. As the Apache warriors began to disperse, heading back to their own lands, the cowboy felt a sense of loneliness creep in. He had spent so many years isolated, away from the world and from others, that he wasn't sure how to live any other way. The warriors had offered him a place among them, but part of him still wondered if he truly belonged. The leader of the Apache turned to him, his face solemn, but with an unmistakable hint of pride. "You have proven yourself," he said. "But there is much more to be done. The fight for this land is far from over." The cowboy nodded, understanding the weight of those words. This fight, this way of life, was not something that would be resolved in a single battle. It was a long, hard road, one that would take everything he had. But he was no longer the weak man the world had once seen. He was stronger now, not just because of the Apache, but because of the choices he had made. "What comes next?" the cowboy asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his heart. "We ride west," the leader said. "There are more settlers there, and they have begun to spread into our territory. We must show them that we will not back down." The cowboy felt a spark of determination light within him. He had already faced down one group of settlers, and he had seen the consequences of their greed and disregard for the land. Now, it was time to face another challenge. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. He would not stand by and let others destroy what was sacred. The leader nodded, reading the cowboy's thoughts. "You will ride with us. Your place is with us now. Together, we will ensure that this land remains free." With those words, The cowboy felt a sense of belonging that had eluded him for so long. He had always thought of himself as an outsider, someone who didn't fit in anywhere. But now, surrounded by the Apache warriors, he realized that he had found his place. The land, the people, and the warriors had become a part of him, and he would fight to protect them, no matter the cost. The next morning, they rode out, the cowboy now firmly in the ranks of the Apache. The journey west was long, but the cowboy felt the weight of his decision settle on him with each passing mile. He was no longer just a man on the outskirts of society. He was part of something bigger, something that was shaping the future of this land. The ride was quiet, the only sound the rhythm of hooves on the earth, but the cowboy knew that ahead of them lay a confrontation that would test them all. They were heading into the heart of the settlers' encroachment, and this time, there would be no turning back. As they approached the next settlement, the cowboy's heart quickened. He had seen enough to know that this was not going to be an easy fight. The settlers were strong, and they had resources. But the cowboy had something they didn't. He had the respect of the Apache warriors, and he had the land itself on his side. The land, after all, belonged to those who fought for it, who understood its power, and who had the strength to protect it. The cowboy looked to the leader, who gave him a knowing glance. This was their fight now, and he was ready. The final day of their journey west was marked by an eerie stillness in the air. The cowboy, along with the Apache warriors, had crossed miles of rugged terrain, each step bringing them closer to the settlement that had dared to stake a claim on the land that had always belonged to the Apache. It had been a long road, but now, as they neared their destination, the cowboy could feel the weight of what was ahead of them. The battle they were about to face would not be just another skirmish. It would be the final stand to protect everything they held dear. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the vast landscape, the cowboy could hear the distant sounds of construction. The settlers were still building, unaware of the force that was about to confront them. The Apache warriors rode silently beside him, their faces set in grim determination. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The cowboy had come a long way from the man who had once been mocked and overlooked. He had earned the respect of the Apache, and with it, a place among them. He had fought for survival, but now, he was fighting for something greater, something worth defending. The land, the people, the way of life. As they approached the settlement, the cowboy could see the men moving about, working on their structures, their backs turned to the approaching group. The tension in the air was palpable, and the cowboy's grip tightened on the reins of his horse. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew that there was no turning back. The Apache leader, riding at the front, raised his hand to signal the group to stop. They all dismounted in unison, moving with quiet precision. The cowboy followed their lead, his heart racing as he watched the settlers continue their work. It wasn't until the leader spoke that the quiet tension was broken. "This is the time," the leader said, his voice steady but carrying a weight of authority. "We do not seek war, but we will not allow them to take what is ours." The cowboy nodded, his thoughts racing. He had seen enough in his time with the Apache to know that their resolve was not to be taken lightly. They were a people who had endured countless hardships, but they had always fought for what was rightfully theirs. This land was no different. The settlers, despite their numbers, would not take it from them. As the leader gave the signal, the warriors moved forward, surrounding the settlement with swift, deliberate movements. The cowboy stayed close behind them, his thoughts focused on the task at hand. He wasn't sure how the settlers would respond, but he knew that the time for negotiation had passed. The settlement's leader, a man who had been overseeing the construction, finally noticed the approaching group. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the Apache warriors closing in, their faces stern and resolute. He raised his hand, trying to signal his men to stop, but it was too late. The warriors had already made their presence known. "You have no right to be here," the Apache leader called out, his voice carrying across the settlement. "This land belongs to my people. Leave now, or face the consequences." The settlers hesitated, fear creeping into their eyes as they realized the gravity of the situation. The cowboy stood silently, his heart pounding in his chest, watching the scene unfold. He had come to this moment not for violence, but for justice. The settlers, who had once thought they could take whatever they wanted, now saw that the Apache would not stand idly. They would fight to protect their land, their way of life. The cowboy looked around, his eyes meeting the leaders. There was no need for further words. The Apache had made their stand. The settlers, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat, their faces showing a mix of fear and confusion. The cowboy stood tall, his chest swelling with pride as he watched them leave. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about defending what was rightfully theirs. As the last of the settlers packed up and rode away, the cowboy turned to the Apache leader. "It's done," the cowboy said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. The leader nodded, his eyes filled with respect. "You fought with us, and for that, you are one of us. This land is yours now, as much as it is ours." The cowboy nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him. He had come full circle, from a man who had been rejected and underestimated, to someone who had earned his place, not just among the Apache, but among the land he had come to love. As the sun set on that day, casting its final golden rays over the land, the cowboy knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. But for now, the land was safe. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged.